Hey guys, welcome back. So our final project, the digital painting intensive, is up now. So please go over through those guidelines and read everything carefully. But I thought it would be helpful to see an example of this project. So I took some time last week and just kind of did this on my own here. And I'll play this, and it's sped up quite a bit, but I'll just talk over and just kind of give out some pointers and just some methods and things that I would suggest. You don't have to do it this way at all, but this is how I would go about doing something like this. So I'm just going to let this play here. And, if you go through the directions there, I mean, I've given you some freedoms here, and I won't go over the specifics of the project in this video, but you're free to work from a sketch or, however else you'd like to get this started. I just did everything in Photoshop with the brush tool, and this is just an imagined space. I just kind of had this idea of this hillside setting with some water and some atmospheric perspective and like I said, this isn't necessarily how you have to go about doing this, but one way to work with Photoshop, or at least one way that I like to work with Photoshop, is I like to work, back to front. Now, because you have the layers, I mean, you can basically move these all around. But as with the traditional painting, I would kind of work on background elements first. I wouldn't necessarily do the details first, but that's up to you because the layers can be switched around. I mean, you could isolate layers and work on details first if you'd like, but I would suggest getting an overall sense of the composition and colors first. So here I was just working through the sky and, notice I'm just on one layer right now. But, I made a selection with the polygonal lasso tool and I filled that in with the gradient just to get the color just where I wanted it. And I'm going through and I'm using a lot of the brushes from that brush packet that I had you download earlier in the week, the one with the vanishing point brush. More out of a sense of time. I was trying to just get things down and do this quickly. Now, you're free to use these brushes as well, but I want to point out again, right? Don't be too overly reliant on them. And you can see here I'm coloring in, and I'm going to use the mixer brush here and come in and I start to blend, this hillside in. So, use the brushes as you would like, but don't forget this is a digital painting, so I will be looking for evidence of using your mark making tools and using the brushes and blending your pigments. So here I go. I'm just filling things in here, and there's a lot of different textures and a lot of different stamp brushes in that set that would be really helpful. And I'm switching back and forth. I mean, I'll use some of the brushes and then I'll paint in, and ideally that's what you should be doing too, is kind of finding this nice balance between using a brush that could really be helpful, but then also not undermining your drawing skills. So here I'm making another selection of just this cliffside that I want, because I want to apply some texture here, but I don't want it to go outside of my box here. So just applying some rock textures, getting this built up. Notice I have a few more layers now, so I kind of have these major elements. I have the sky, the grass, the cliff, right? So use layers and group things accordingly. Okay. So I can't remember how long this total time took me. Like I said, I mean, I went fairly fast because I was wanting to get this done so you guys could just see, how this could come to fruition. But I would say this was, I don't know, probably a couple hours, two hours maybe. Um, Give or take a little bit there, but a lot of that time was cut short because of the brushes I was using really kind of sped things up as far as just getting some of these trees and rock textures in place. So, if I had a bit more time, I most likely would have done some of this stuff with my own drawing techniques rather than relied on brushes. Okay. I did have a lot of fun just going through those different brushes though. There's a lot of cool ones, and I found myself really just wanting to trick this out and get a ton of little detail in there. So there is an overall color scheme that I was thinking here. So in my mind, I was thinking of the secondary triad, so greens, orange, and violets. I didn't quite use as much violet as maybe I could have, but the green and the orange were definitely two colors that I knew I was going to be harmonizing with. And then the rocks have a little bit, and the sky has a little bit, but there's that kind of a softer gray violet that I've used a bit sporadically, and you'll see more of that as that comes in here. So definitely be thinking of that, right? I mean, don't, I give instructions in in the outline, but don't just be choosing colors at random. I mean, hopefully, the color choices that you make will just come intuitively by just having an understanding of what colors work better than others. So keep that in mind. Also, when it comes to structuring your composition, right, there is that Fibonacci sequence brush, but be thinking about things like diagonals. So here the path is a direct compositional tool that's kind of leading the eye up into that, that castle in the background. The rule of thirds, right? You could think about that far back horizon line as one of the horizontals in the rule of thirds, and then the water line that I'm doing at the bottom here is another example. I don't quite have anything in those intersecting rule of third cross points. I mean, maybe the castle, but it's a little bit high up. So I mean, and that's just one method, right? Remember, it doesn't have to be rule of thirds at all. I mean, I just want you to be thinking about some compositional tools, right? So things like scale, right? I mean, obviously, as things are getting closer to us, right? These trees on the right are getting larger and more detailed. Right? The atmospheric perspective is at play here, right? There's less contrast in those trees as we move further out. And remember, what I'm looking for here is that you have a proper understanding of depth, right? I mean, if we've kind of been doing these exercises and going over atmospheric perspective and linear perspective, right? We should be familiar that this is the thing that we have to deal with, is how do we convey a realistic sense of depth, right? So your painting, right, is you have a lot of freedom, right? You could do, I mean, I'm just choosing to do this outdoor scene, and right, it incorporates nicely with, the sky and a foreground, background, middle ground, but you could choose, I mean, you could do anything you wanted, right? The space you choose doesn't necessarily have to be one that's receding far, right? You just have to establish foreground, middle ground, background, right? And that can be open to your interpretation there. So you may not have elements of atmospheric perspective, just depending on your space. You could choose to do figures or no figures. I didn't put any people in this or animals or anything like that. So I'm excited to see what you guys come up with. I mean, there's a lot of creative control here. I know many of you probably have been drawing and, making art and images for a while now. So I'm sure you probably have some good ideas that you've kind of tinkered around with in the past. So let's see if we can bring those into Photoshop. So what I'm doing here is I wanted this to be water on the bottom, and right, water is a reflective surface. So what I was doing is I was experimenting with copying the layers above and then jumping those onto a layer and then flipping it vertically and then placing it underneath everything that I had, just because I wanted to get a nice proper mirror image. So, I probably could have done that a bit nicer, but I think it turned out okay. I think towards the end here I was getting pretty hungry and I didn't want to come back to it. So I feel like overall I was pretty happy with this, but looking back on it now, maybe I'll still work on it, but trying to get the water right, getting the surface tension and actually getting it to look a bit more like water. I mean, I think it comes out okay, but I think I could have pushed this a bit further. So again, I'm using, there's a nice little water brush that kind of is meant to imitate, just some surface ripples. I think I went too crazy with these here. Okay. So hopefully this video is helpful. Like I said, I just wanted this to be an example that you could, just kind of see the workflow and just see the image, as it could potentially build, right, and start from scratch. So whether you choose to, freehand draw it in or work from a sketch, I mean, that's fine. But keep in mind, this is a digital painting exercise, right? It's not color your sketch in like, we've done before. This is way more involved, way more intense than that. So, right, keep that in mind here. Oh, I was gonna add a little campfire in here, but I think I just got hungry. I was like, I'm done with this. Okay, so let's see how we do on this, right? So email me if you have questions, but we have a good amount of time left. We have, I believe 4 weeks on this, so you should be, I would definitely recommend some smaller sketches and just kind of play around with different compositions. I would, take some notes and write out what color schemes you think might be appropriate. And then you should be working on this, and just like our other projects, right, it'll be due on a Friday, and the form submission will be on the following Sunday. So, yeah, have fun. Let's get to work.